Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is just a quick sort of introductory JavaScript video. This video is not going to get into how to set up your own JavaScript environment. So if you don't have like Visual Studio Code and Node.js already installed on your computer, the easiest thing you can do is you can go to a website called REPL, REPL.it, and you can create a JavaScript REPL and you can practice JavaScript there. There are several websites where you can kind of practice JavaScript online. But if you do have Visual Studio Code, which is the editor that I'm using here, if you do have Node.js, which you can go to nodejs.org and install, you'll be able to do these commands in the terminal. Okay, so here I have a little sample file. Every JavaScript file always starts with a .js, so testing.js. And basically what you're learning with JavaScript is how to program. JavaScript is the language of the web. All front-end logic is done in web design in JavaScript, and with Node, a lot of back-end. So if you don't know what those mean yet, I have lots of videos where you can learn all that stuff. So bottom line is this. Let's just learn the basic thing you always learn when you learn a new programming language: how to get the words hello world in the terminal screen. Now if you want to print something to the terminal screen, you're just going to use console. Console represents this is the console, the terminal. Okay, because everything in JavaScript is an object. So there's all sorts of different objects that represent different things you're interacting with. Like the browser is called the window. Okay, the website you're at is the document. This terminal window is the console, and each of these objects have lots of functions you can use on them. So one function you can use is log, because usually the console is really used for debugging. That's what the console is for. So console.log, and basically what console.log does is that anything you put in these parentheses, it'll print to the screen. So we're going to put a string. A string is a set of letters. Okay, so we put quotation marks, could be single quotes, could be double quotes, could be a backtick. A backtick is the character that's right above your tab key, right with the tilde, right below your escape key. You'll see this character. It looks like a single quote, but it's really a backtick. I'm just going to use a single quote, and you can type in whatever you want in here, and that's a string. Hello world. Cool. So I have one command. Now let me save it. And then what I do here is, if you have Node.js installed in your terminal, you can type in node and the name of the file, testing.js, and it'll run the file. And we see that we've printed hello world to the screen. Okay, so there you've done it. You've done some programming. Okay, so that's what console log does. It just prints whatever you put in the parentheses out. Now, next thing you should learn is how to declare variables. There are 3 ways to declare variables. Okay, the first 2 ways allow you to change the variable after the fact. So the first one's var. Okay, so I can say var, we'll just call this a, meaning variable a. That's the name of the variable. We'll say variable a equals 1, and then we can actually change the value. Now we'll say a equals 2. So a did equal 1, now it equals 2, and now I'm going to console.log a. Save. Okay, so var is a declarator. It says this is a new variable, so that's why I don't put var again, because a now exists. I don't need to redeclare it. So you only need to declare a variable once. So I'm going to say, hey, there's a new variable called a. It's going to start with the number 1, but hey, I'm going to change what a is worth. I'm going to change it to 2. So now when I console log it, it should console log its newer value of 2. And that's what we do. We get the newer value of 2. That's reassignment. I could also do this with the declarator of let. This would end up with the same result. Okay, so first it was 1, then it changed to 2. Cool. And in the last one, I can't do this. Const. Const means constant. So once I've declared it and assigned it a value 1, that can never change. So here, when I try to reassign the value 2 to a, it's going to throw me an error saying, hey, you can't reassign a constant variable. Well, first let's save it. It's going to complain. Oh, There we go. See, and there's the error. See, assignment to a constant variable. You can't do it. Okay, so so that for me to fix that, this has to be let or var. Okay. Now, good habit is to generally declare all your variables as const. Okay, because you should only use let and var if you really, really need to reassign your variables. Because you don't want other code accidentally reassigning your variables unintentionally, and you don't catch it because they are reassignable. If you make all your variables constant, and something tries to reassign your variables by accident, you'll catch it because you'll get that reassignment error. So, you know, the idea is always try to don't put extra flexibility in your code if it doesn't need it, because then that's where errors happen and they go uncatched because your code can handle it even though it's not supposed to. Cool. Now, this begs the question, what's the difference between let and var? This is what we get into what's called scoping. Okay, var has a very old school way of scoping because once upon a time, var was your only option. And the way var works is that if you declare a variable with a var, it's always available everywhere throughout the code. Okay? The only time, so basically right now it's available. Now if I were to declare a function, we don't know what a function is yet, so basically a function is just a clump of code that I can use more than once. But we'll just say my func equals, so this you don't know what this means yet. But just trust me, it's a thing. So the actual function and what the function does is in these curly brackets. Now if I were to declare a variable with a var in here, then it gets what's called local scoping. So with var, it's only global and local. If it's declared anywhere other than a function, it's global. If it's declared in a function, then it's local to that function. Okay, so if I do this, var b equals 2, and then I were to use the function, so I'm actually going to use the function, and then try the console log a and b, I'm still going to get an error because b only exists inside the function. So the minute this function is done doing its thing, this b variable disappears. So essentially what happens is right here, I just use the function, which just says, hey, there's a variable called b that's equal to, and then that variable disappears, and that's literally it. That's all the function did. It was kind of useless. But the point is, I can't access that b variable because it was declared inside the function. It has local scoping. Okay, so here I'm going to get, see, b is not defined because b is never defined in the global scope outside of the function. But if I were to use an if statement is not a function. An if statement is just me asking, hey, you know, if something is true. So if I say if true, how an if statement works, it says if whatever's in the parentheses is true, here I'm just going to put in the word true, so it's just true, then run the code that's in these curly brackets. In this case, if I use var here, so if I say var b equals 2, okay, this still has global scope because it's not a function. If is not a function. Okay, so since I declared it in the if statement, it still has a global scope, so I'll still be able to console log it here. So I hit save, and oh, I don't want to click on that. Okay, and then let's run the code again. And let's see here, complain. My function. Oh, I accidentally wrote. I got rid of this function, so let me get rid of that. Save. And see, now I have two variables a and b that both equal 2. So they both got console logged. But now here's where we start seeing the difference between var and let. Let, it's not global and local scope. It's just block scope. Okay, so basically out here, there are no curly brackets around the entirety. Like this line here is not inside any set of curly brackets. So it's global. But if I declare it, if I use let inside any set of curly brackets, the variable only exists inside that curly brackets. So here, if I use let here, the variable doesn't exist outside these curly brackets. So it's not just functions, but any curly brackets. Okay? So now if I do this, I should get that error that b is not defined again. Okay, see, b is not defined. And it doesn't even have to be an if statement. It could just literally be an arbitrary set of curly brackets that I put in my code. Okay, which sometimes people do that. People do that just because they want to run some calculations, but they don't want the variables to become global. So they'll put them in curly brackets so that way their code disposes of those variables once those calculations are done. Okay, so now if I do this again, see, b is still not defined. Because even though b is here, inside these curly brackets, outside of these curly brackets, it does not exist. Const works the same way. So const is also block scope. So basically, const and let are block scoping any set of curly brackets. Var is global or local. It's either declared in a function, making it local, or it's declared outside of a function, making it global. There, again, it's better to use block scoping, so it's always better to use const and let. So that way, the scoping is a little bit more predictable because you know any curly brackets, that's the limit of that variable. And also makes your code a little bit less flexible. Okay, var basically is kind of like some curly brackets, your variable is global, some curly brackets, your variable is global. There are situations where you kind of have to use var or as a workaround versus maybe some other solutions. But generally you're going to stick, it's kind of like generally you'll always declare const unless you think you're going to reassign the variable, then you'll go to let, and if for some reason the block scoping gets in your way, then you go to var. So when you choose how you declare your variables, you always want to kind of give your variables as less flexibility as possible, so that way your code's more predictable. And again, all we're doing is we're just storing this information in this little label. Cool. Okay, so that's variables. And again, variables can be numbers, they can be strings, which are letters, they can be booleans. Okay, so I can store true or false. So if I were to do this, store the value of true in here, and then I console.log, a. Let's take a look at what I get. True. And it doesn't just have to be a, it could be an expression. So an expression is something that resolves into something else. Okay, so basically an expression could be something like 5 is greater than 6. Now 5 is not greater than 6, so that's going to resolve to the value of false. This is what's referred to as a Boolean expression because it returns a Boolean of true or false. So save. So this expression, see, returns false. But there's not just Boolean expressions, there's also mathematical expressions. So a Boolean expression is one that's going to resolve into a true or a false. A mathematical expression is one that's going to resolve to some sort of mathematical number. So this could be 5 plus 6. So 5 plus 6 is going to be 11, so that's going to resolve to the number 11. So that ends up being what a is worth. And we got 11. Okay. So again, an expression is anything that once you play out all the pieces, you end up with one value. That's an expression. Okay, another example of a Boolean expression is, does 5 equal 5? So that's right. When you want to say equal, are two things the same thing, you should use 3 equal signs. There are situations where you may want to use 2. I don't want to really get into that distinction right now. So the best habit is to always use 3 equal signs, what's called strict equality. So does 5 equal 5? Yes. So that should resolve to true. That's a Boolean expression, although I didn't save. Save. Cool. So now we understand Boolean expressions, we understand mathematical expressions, we understand declaring variables, we understand scoping. So far, so good. Okay, and we're only at 14 minutes, not bad. Let's do some conditionals. So you already kind of know if basically takes a conditional, but now we can actually try some out. So let's say 5 is greater than 6, which we know is false. Okay, and we're going to say console.log. And we'll say, hey, if this code runs, this is true. Okay, and if I hit save, nothing happens because that's not true. But what if I wanted something to happen if it's false? Then I'll use what's called an else statement. So if, else, and then these curly brackets are what happens if the if is not true. So console.log, this is false. Okay, so this happens if this is true. This happens if this is false. Okay, so let's see here. This is false. Okay, you can see that right over here. Okay. If I do 5 less than 6, this is true. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Okay. And then let's say you wanted to evaluate something else, you could do an if-else statement. So then you can be like if else, and then you have to put in another expression. So we'll say if else 5 is less than 6. Now it's true, we'll say. Although I think this is an else if. So let me change that around. Else if. There we go. So 5 less than. Let's make this false. So 5 greater than 6. And then we'll put else. Console.log. This is false. Okay. Save. And does not like something here. Why does it not like that semicolon? Unterminate. Oh. Boop. There we go. Cool. So now if I save that, again, 5 is not greater than 6, so this is false, so it will not run. Else if 5 is less than 6, 5 is less than 6, so this is true. Okay. So it's going to run now it is true. That's where this is going to end. But if I make this false, so like 5 is less than 4, so this is false, so then it'll go down here. This is false. Now that's all fine and dandy, but I mean, when you start doing a lot of else ifs after a while, okay, else if, else if, else if, else if, it gets a little crazy. So what they've done is they created something called a switch statement. So a switch statement works like this. What you do is you say switch, and then here in the parentheses, you put a value to test against a bunch of possible cases. So we're going to say we'll just say const a equals 1. Okay, and we're going to test a. So a is our switch. And then what you do is you do curly brackets, and everything happens in the curly brackets. And then we put our possible cases. So the first case we'll say is 1. You do a colon. And then here we put the code of what will happen if a equals 1. We'll say console log a equals 1. And then what you want to do is you want to put a break statement. So that way it just kind of ends there. And then we'll just make a few more of these. Control C. Control V. Oop, that kind of got all super indented. Rather have that over here. Make this easy to follow. Okay, and this will be case for 2, 3. Okay, and that's the. And then you want to add one more case called default. Okay, which is just what happens if none of the other above cases are true. I'm just going to let it break if that's the case. Okay, so there's a switch statement. So I'm testing this value against these possibilities. So right now a equals 1, so should trigger the first case. So let's try it out. A is equal to 1. Let's make it 2. So I hit save. A is equal to 2. And if we make it 3, oh, I didn't save. Cool. Okay, nice. Whew. Okay, now for loops. So we may want to repeat stuff over and over again. Okay, so let's do this. Let's say x equals 0. Well, well, gotta be able to change. So let x equals 0. And you want to repeat, you want to count from like 0 to, let's say, 10. Okay, what I can do is what's called a while loop. So I'm going to say while whatever is inside the parentheses is true. So I'm going to put in some sort of Boolean expression. So I'll say x is less than or equal than 10. Then do whatever's in the curly brackets until that's no longer true. So each time we'll just console.log x. So x is going to start out at 0. But if I do this, it's going to be an infinite loop because x is always going to be 0. So that would just happen forever because that's always true. So what I'm going to do is at the end of each loop, we're going to add 1 to x. So if I do x plus plus, the plus plus equals what's called an increment. It always adds 1 to the variable. So I'm just going to add 1 to x at the end of each loop. And we'll just keep doing that till we get to 10. Okay. So now if I do this, and you see, it counts because first it's 0, we console log the x, then we add 1 to x. Then the loop happens again. Is x still less than or equal than 10? Yes, so let's do it again. And it just keeps doing it over and over again. So that's one way to do a loop, but we can make it even simpler. Or I mean, having this line of code here and this line of code here, this kind of spreads everything out. So we can make it even more condensed by doing this, a for loop. So what a for loop does, it's the same thing, except we're going to take this and move it at the front of our parentheses. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a semicolon here and take this piece and move it there. So it does the same exact thing, except now we have how do we kick off the variable that, we can kick off our variable here. We have our Boolean expression here, and what do we do at the end of each loop here? So that way it's all in one nice little tidy expression. And see, like this is a lot more condensed. So now if I run that, I'm going to get the same result. Cool. That's very nice. Okay, so now you know how to do loops. Okay, we're at 23 minutes. We're doing good. Let's just go over functions and we'll call it a day. Probably the best way to declare a function. There are multiple ways to do it. I'll show you all 3. The newest way and the way that's going to just, again, you want to make sure your code is less flexible as possible. So that way unpredictable things don't happen. You're going to want to use what's called an arrow function. And what a function is just a clump of code that you can give a name, and you can kind of think of it as like a spell in a magic book of spells. Your functions are your spells, and they do certain things, and you can call them whatever you want by calling the spell's name. So we're going to say const, fireball equals, and then what you're going to do is you're going to do a parentheses, and then you're going to do a little arrow like this, and then some curly brackets. And then whatever you want to happen when you use this spell, this function, you put inside the curly brackets. So we're just going to say console.log fireball. Cool. So now what I've done, let me just save this. It's still not happy about something. Let's take a look. Const fireball equals console.log. What is it upset about? He just doesn't like where it broke stuff. Save. Okay. Yeah, I don't see why it's giving me this this red dot, but whatever. Okay. So now we can actually use the function, and the way we use the function is just by calling its name, fireball, and putting 2 parentheses. So the fireball is just a name of the function. It's the parentheses that say cast the spell. So I'm invoking the function. So I'm saying fireball. 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 Okay. Okay, fireball, fireball, fireball. Now, let's say I wanted to say, make it where I can specify how powerful or how big this fireball is. I might want to pass in that information. That's where the parentheses starts becoming more valuable. So what I can do is when I define my function, I define what's called a parameter, essentially a variable, in this parenthesis. So we'll just call the size of the fireball. Okay? I'm intending that we're going to pass down the word, like large, small. So we're going to say that we're going to take whatever the size of the fireball is and add it to the word fireball. So I'll just give this a space. Okay? And there we go. So this is a parameter. This is just a variable. So we don't know what the size is yet. So now I'll say, hey, fireball, and then pass in small. Fireball, and this is called an argument. When I pass in the actual data, that's referred to as an argument. Okay? So medium, fireball, large. Okay, now what happens when we run the code? I have a small fireball, medium fireball, large fireball. Because what happens is that this argument gets passed in, it fills in this parameter, and then gets replaced here, and this becomes small plus fireball, medium plus fireball, large plus fireball. Okay, and then you start seeing how this gets really flexible and useful in what you're doing. Okay, there's a lot more about functions. For any of these particular topics, I have like a half-hour long video on that alone, on loops, on variables, on scope. But this is again just a quick go over. Okay, but let's just show you the other two ways you could have done this function. Okay, so another way you could have done it is you could have done function fireball size. Okay, console.log size plus fireball. Okay, so this is sort of the original way to declare functions. So if I do this, fireball small, we end up in the same place. The thing is that there's other reasons under the hood of doing this, like there's extra stuff that's going on that makes this, you can use it in more situations. The problem is it also can be unpredictable because of all the extra baggage it has. So that's why arrow functions are always the best way to go. The third way you could do this is I could do something like this. Okay, so let me just let you look at that for a moment. Toot, 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 toot. Okay. I could do const fireball equals function size. It's almost the same thing as the previous one. Console.log. Oh yeah, size plus fireball. Okay, and they're not, all three of these aren't necessarily identical. There are little mini nuances between the three. You save yourself a lot of the stress by just using arrow functions because you don't have to worry about the little nuances, things like hoisting and prototypes. Okay, I mean, really the difference is, when you use that function keyword at the beginning, it's hoisted, which you don't know what that means. It just means that it's the interpreter of JavaScript does a weird, it changes where it is in the code. It hoists it, and there's a prototype attached to it, which just means there's this object attached to it that you can use to make other objects. When you do it this way, where you use the function keyword on this side of the equal sign, it doesn't get hoisted, but you still have the prototype. If you use the arrow function, it's not hoisted and doesn't have a prototype. So you don't have to worry about those things accidentally interfering in your code because you didn't know what they were. So again, it's just always easier to use the arrow function so you don't have to worry about those things. Okay, cool. But for a basic function, all three ways work. So hopefully this was a nice introduction to JavaScript. I'll see you guys later on. Have a great day and enjoy.